And welcome to your Political Pulse. We are joined by Brian Gosch. He is the state director for the NRA for the state of South Dakota. Brian, welcome back to Political Pulse. We appreciate you coming back.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
So you're coming here where we have some news already out of the state legislature and really out of the executive branch, out of the governor's office. Governor Roden and State Senator Casey Crabtree announced that they will be working to remove suppressors from the list of controlled weapons in the state of South Dakota. I know the NRA is backing this. Can you explain your organization's support for this move?
Absolutely. So the suppressor is just a piece of hearing protection. Never really should have been part of the National Firearms Act in the first place. So Congress removing the $200 tax stamp was a good first move. And the next is to finally remove it from the National Firearms Act. And several congressmen have had bills to do that. Unfortunately, they haven't had enough traction in the Senate side, particularly to get that 60-vote threshold to pass that.
So right now, nationally, if you look at suppressors, because even though these are removed from the state-controlled weapons list, they are still federally regulated under the NFA, meaning there's a lot of framework for somebody who wants to and steps somebody has to go through in order to buy one of these, correct?
100%. You still have to go through all that paperwork and all that registration now that you had to do in the past. And so all that stays in place. You still have to file your Form 4. You have to get ATF background check and approval. You have to wait that amount of time before approval, except now you're not paying the tax stamp. And for some manufacturers, they were covering that tax stamp for you. And so that should help them with their operating costs now. That's one less expense that they're going to have.
So it's really just getting excised onto the consumer in a lot of ways, I would imagine then.
Yeah, that's right. And in a lot of cases it was.
So you were telling me it could be pretty lengthy too, right? This process to buy a suppressor, this background check process can take quite a bit of time, right, for somebody trying to buy one?
Right, the manufacturer has to get a serial number after they manufacture their device. They have to apply to the ATF to get that serial number. That could take up to 9 to 12 months. And once that serial number is assigned to that particular suppressor, then a customer could start purchasing it, and that could take, in the past, 9 to 18 months at times before that could get approved. And then you could take possession of your suppressor, but then you had to comply with all the rules. That suppressor belonged to you, only you could use it. Your friends could use it on a firearm if you were in their presence. Unless you made a National Firearms Act type trust and you named certain adult individuals on that trust, so then they could use those firearms as well.
What do you think the likelihood this will get through the South Dakota legislature?
Nothing's a given. In fact, what can seem like an easy process at times can turn into something really strange. But without any of those odd things happening, it should go through.
I want to give you a chance to respond to some of the concerns with suppressors. I looked into this, and one of the common arguments seems to be that suppressors hinder the ability for law enforcement to locate a shooter, or maybe just bystanders in the area. If there is a shooting to take place, that people wouldn't be able to tell where those shots are being shot from, and that could be a safety issue. So both for law enforcement trying to locate the shooter and also for people in the area. What do you say to those concerns?
With any shooter, the first shot is always harder to locate. It's the second shot where a person hearing that sound can start pinpointing where it came from. Now, whether it's at 100 decibels or 140 decibels, I think the listener will still be able to pinpoint that shooter on the second shot. I don't think that becomes an issue for law enforcement, quite frankly, especially when you consider the fact that these suppressors don't silence the firearm. They just reduce the decibel levels, typically below the hearing loss level. So at about 140 decibels, you're going to experience some hearing loss, potentially significant if it's a duration of time that can cause more damage at those high levels. Like a jet engine sound or the report of a firearm. But the suppressor can take that down 20, 30 decibels to a point where you're not going to have that significant hearing loss.
You told me recently for a story I was doing, it's all about hearing protection. So I want to also give you the chance to talk about the benefits of suppressors and those hearing protection benefits that you're talking about.
Sure. So along those lines of what I was just talking about, and safety part of it too. Like if you're out in the field hunting with youth particularly and you're trying to guide them and talk to them and communicate, if they have noise reducing hearing protection in their ears or covering their ears, it's harder for them to hear you and offer guidance as to where they should be, if they're too far ahead or too far behind, if they should move to their left or right, things like that, what they should be watching out for, reminding them that there's posters on the end of the field, reminding them to watch out for these guys who are over in a certain area. If they can't hear you, then they're not going to be as safe. Now, if everyone is using a suppressed firearm, that's going to reduce that hearing loss level, then you don't need that other extra hearing protection. And then for the shooter themselves, if the suppressor is properly equipped on the firearm and it's the right suppressor, that should take it below the hearing loss levels in most cases.
Now, on the National Firearms Act, as a whole, I know the NRA just filed a lawsuit challenging the legality of this, which calls for weapons under the act to be subject to registration and a $200 transfer tax, which I looked into was actually established a long time ago. I mean, decades ago. This was established so long ago that at the time, when I read into this, it seemed like they thought that $200 would actually hinder firearm sales, and this was, of course, they were trying to crack down on a lot of organized crime at the time. Now $200 probably seems a lot less significant than it did at the time that this was enacted, but Congress did just eliminate the tax. This will go into effect in 2027. This was through the big beautiful bill. The argument seems to be that with Congress throwing out this tax, this is no longer a use of their taxing powers, Congress's taxing power. So ultimately, this is kind of a moot point now to even have this in place.
Right. So back in 1934, when the National Firearms Act passed, $200 was a lot more in actual spending power than it is today. And so the equivalent today would probably be a little over $3,500. And so if you had to pay $3,500 or more for a tax stamp today, it would certainly be more cost prohibitive in order to secure that suppressor. Now, removing that completely, makes it more likely people can buy that type of hearing protection for their firearms. And hopefully the lawsuit is successful so that through that means, because it's harder to get it through Congress for the 60-vote threshold in the U.S. Senate, like I was saying earlier, if you can get it through the courts and get the case before the U.S. Supreme Court, and if they agree with our position, then it's pulled out of the National Firearms Act. It becomes a commodity that can be bought and sold like it was prior to it being included. So I think when the suppressor was first invented around the early 20th century, I believe it was around 1902, it was used quite broadly for those purposes, for reducing that. So I think Teddy Roosevelt used to use it to be a little bit quieter when shooting predators around his neighbors. And it just made sense to be respectful of your neighbors, your fellow hunters, and then your own hearing loss, and try to avoid that.
So this lawsuit doesn't center on the complete National Firearms Act, which I know encompassed a lot of guns at the time that were being used by organized crime, but this lawsuit centers on the suppressors being within the scope of that Firearms Act.
Right, and the more you understand the suppressor and how similar it is to a muffler on your car, and why we have mufflers, it's for that very reason, to be more respectful of the people around us, so our vehicles are quieter. And that same concept then was applied to the firearms with that suppressor. And when you consider why it's there and what it does and how it does protect your hearing and my hearing and everyone around, and since that's all it is, it's not a scary object, it doesn't actually silence the firearm, then it should not be part of the National Firearms Act.
Republicans right now have entire control of the federal government. They've got Congress, they've got the Senate, they have the White House. But as you allude to, a lot of this, it sounds like, would take a 60-vote threshold to get some of this gun legislation enacted in favor of the NRA. But do you see anywhere where you can make some headroom right now with these majorities and with control of the White House being in Republican hands right now?
I hope so. I hope enough pro-Second Amendment legislators see the value in the Hearing Protection Act, that Tom Cotton brought from Arkansas. I hope they can see that. I think part of it is just educating and getting people to understand what this device actually does and what it doesn't do. It's not like the movies. If you've ever shot a suppressed firearm, the first time you do it, the first thing you're going to say is, "Whoa, that was really loud. I thought it made the gun quiet," and it just doesn't. Now, maybe at a really small caliber, that's already quiet and maybe with a subsonic round, so you don't have the snap of the sound, the sound waves from the sound barrier, then maybe you can get that really quiet. But otherwise, it's going to be loud.
Are there any other areas that you're looking to make progress aside from suppressors right now on the national level?
Oh yeah, sure. There's various deals, and of course, just a reminder that I work at the state level, so we're focused on state and local issues. But at the federal level, there's various things that the NRA is working on, and maybe at another episode we'll talk about some of those.
Let's get back to the state legislature here. And I know you work as a lobbyist in multiple states, not just South Dakota. So I think it'll be interesting to see what you're tracking in other states. But we'll start with our own state legislature here. What are some of your goals this next legislative session?
Well, we have the suppressor bill, of course, and then you never know what comes up organically. And then there's a few other ideas that have been floating around, like lawful commerce in arms, strengthening our existing statute there, protecting firearm manufacturers from lawsuits against individuals who were harmed by the use of something they manufactured. And we've had some progress in other states like Montana, where we've been able to enhance that language to help protect manufacturers in that state. And so we have a pretty good statute in the books now, but we can look at ways that maybe strengthening that to ensure that manufacturers can live and exist here and make that product, knowing that if somebody goes on later to abuse that product or use it in a crime, that they can't be sued because of it. Kind of like if I manufacture a hammer and somebody uses that hammer in the commission of a crime later, should I be sued as a manufacturer of that hammer?
Where do you think South Dakota could strengthen those protections for manufacturers?
Oh, probably like on the advertising side of things, so if they're manufacturing and then also making it known to the public that this firearm is for sale and what it looks like and whatnot, if later then somebody gets harmed by it and they claim, well, they specifically advertised this in a certain way, that a claim could be that, then because it was advertised that way and purchased for that, then somebody was harmed and then they get and then they get sued.
Okay. Back to the other states that you cover. Can you give me a list again of all the states in which you're going into state legislatures? And for people who are not aware, you were the former Speaker of the House here in South Dakota, so you're very aware of the state legislative process. But give me a list, if you could again, of the states you go and lobby for laws in favor of the NRA.
Right, so Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota.
And which of these states right now is on your radar the most? Where do you feel like you're doing the most work right now?
Minnesota.
And can you give us an idea of what that work looks like?
Because of the political dynamics there, the close margins in the House and Senate between Republicans and Democrats, and you have a governor who wants to be a third-term governor, and he's campaigning to the left. He's trying to get more votes and support from the left side of his party. And then he's trying to generate, some fundraising and whatnot off of that. He's talked about doing a constitutional provision to suppress firearms, not in a good way, suppress firearms, but for gun control in Minnesota. And he's also recently talked about doing executive orders. He had called for a special session, but then he didn't actually call it. This was back in September, October area. And now he's talking about doing executive orders, despite a statewide preemption law that says only the state legislature can set gun policy. He's talking about just coming out and saying executive orders, and he's intimated that it would be for a so-called assault weapon ban or magazine limitations.
So do you have any other information on what this might look like aside from what you said he's hinted at? Has there been anything more clearly spelled out as far as legislation in Minnesota?
Well, in the past, there's been several bills to do things like that, but they haven't been able to get any traction.
Okay. But one of the things being floated, you're saying, is an assault weapon ban. What would that look like?
Well, he would it would target the AR platform, pretty much, and any type of firearm like it. He'd be focused on the semi-automatic what they call assault rifles. Now, they're not assault rifles. They don't have a selective trigger. They can't go full auto. They can't do a 3-round burst. They can't do anything like that. It's just a simple semi-automatic rifle like you would use for deer hunting. But it just looks different. It looks like a so-called assault rifle. It looks like something the military would use. But it's not what the military uses. So
at this point, there hasn't really been any official action, so it sounds like this is something you're more monitoring from what you're laying out.
yes, yes. And so I keep trying to pay attention to, do they pull the trigger on it? Do they actually go with the executive order route? And I think to some extent, he doesn't care about the legality of it. He's just trying to make political hay.
Are there any other, outside of the states that you cover, are there any issues you're seeing bubble up in other states? And as somebody who works as a state director, you're really watching out to make sure, states under your scope don't model anything off of the same exact laws that you're seeing bubble up in other parts of the country.
Yeah, for sure. And you never know what a legislator may or may not bring. But then you also have to kind of, play defense a bit. So if you get a good provision in place, you have to try to stop the gun grabbers from changing that or weakening that law that you passed. And so some of it's going to be monitoring some of the stuff we've been able to pass over the last 8 years that I've been doing this and making sure that nobody tries to draw it back.
Okay, I just want to give you the floor here. Anything we haven't touched on that you think is important right now as it pertains to gun ownership in America?
No, I think, one of the things the NRA is always focused on is hunter and gun safety. And every user should be mindful of that and get the proper training like you would, before you use a car or before you use, any type of equipment. You want to use it safely. How do I use a microwave? What can I put in it? What shouldn't I put in it? Get the facts, know what you're doing, get the proper training, and then go enjoy it in the way that you choose. Whether it's hunting or target shooting or sport shooting, and have fun with it.
Okay, well, Brian, we appreciate you coming on the show yet again to talk about some gun issues here in South Dakota and our neighboring state of Minnesota. Again, we do really appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you.
All right, and that will do it for your Political Pulse.